14 children disappeared without a trace during what should have been an ordinary school trip in 2007, leaving behind nothing but questions and heartbreak. 18 years of silence followed, until a discovery emerged that would shatter every theory, every assumption, and rewrite the narrative of their vanishing. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. Claire Wren hadn't set foot in Delpine, Vermont for nearly 7 years, yet the town greeted her with the same sleepy, stubborn persistence. Maintag Street still boasted the same faded storefronts. The town square's gazebo remained perpetually in need of fresh paint, and familiar faces still nodded with that peculiar mix of recognition and restraint. Nothing ever truly changed here, except the people who left. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows as she pulled up to her father's house. Dan Wren's aging 2-story colonial stood like a sentinel of memories, its weathered clapboard siding, telling stories of harsh winters and neglected maintenance. Claire hesitated before retrieving her suitcase from the trunk, breathing in the crisp autumn air that carried hints of wood smoke and fallen leaves. "You made good time," her father said from the doorway, his tall frame slightly more stooped than she remembered. The awkward hug they shared felt like a formality between strangers who once knew each other well. Inside, the house smelled of lemon polish and old books, a time capsule preserved in amber. Her childhood photographs still lined the hallway, frozen moments of a life interrupted. Claire ran her fingers along the banister as she carried her bag upstairs, each step creaking in familiar places. That night, sleep eluded her. The ceiling fan's rhythmic clicking only amplified her restlessness. Around midnight, she gave up, pulled on a sweater, and decided to walk through the quiet streets of her hometown. The cool night air cleared her head as she wandered aimlessly, eventually finding herself near the post office, where a new storefront caught her eye. "Second Chances," read the hand-painted sign above the thrift store. A small bell announced her entry into the dimly lit space crammed with the discarded treasures of other people's lives. The elderly woman behind the counter barely looked up from her crossword puzzle as Claire browsed through shelves of mismatched dishes, worn paperbacks, and forgotten trinkets. In the jewelry display case, something glinted under the fluorescent light. Claire's heart stuttered as the shopkeeper unlocked the case and handed her a delicate silver charm bracelet. The tiny music note, the miniature dog, and the letter J dangled from the tarnished chain. Her fingers trembled as she turned over the clasp to find the initials she knew would be there. "JD. How much?" she whispered, already digging for her wallet. $10, the woman replied. "Just came in yesterday." Claire clutched the impossible object, a ghost made solid. This bracelet belonged to Janie Delcourt, her best friend who'd vanished on that school bus 18 years ago. Janie, who never went anywhere without this bracelet. Janie, whose body was never found. The past wasn't finished with Delpine, and now neither was Claire. The music note, tiny dog, and letter J charms dangled from the silver bracelet, catching the dim light of Claire Wren's bedroom lamp. Her fingers trembled as she traced each familiar trinket. The bracelet was unmistakable. Janie Delcourt had worn it every single day of 7th grade. Claire remembered how her best friend would fiddle with it during tests, the gentle tinkling sound earning her stern looks from teachers. "She never took it off," Claire whispered to the empty room. "Not for swimming, not for gym class, nothing." Turning the bracelet over, she found what she was looking for, the initials JD faintly engraved on the clasp. Her stomach tightened. This wasn't some mass-produced piece of jewelry that happened to look similar. This was Janie's bracelet, the one her grandmother had given her for her 12th birthday. Claire sat on the edge of her childhood bed, memories flooding back. 18 years had passed since that October morning when Bus 12 had departed Delpine Middle School for what should have been a routine field trip to Bear Hollow Preserve. 14 students and their substitute teacher, Alan Baird, had boarded that yellow vehicle. None returned. The town of Delpine had transformed overnight. Search parties combed the woods for weeks. Helicopters circled overhead. Parents held vigils with flickering candles that eventually burned out, just like their hope. Claire had watched her father, Dan Wren, age years in mere days as he joined the search for his daughter's best friend. Then came the silence. No crash site was ever found. No bodies recovered. The forest had seemingly swallowed 14 children and a grown man without leaving a single trace. The investigation stalled, then quietly disappeared from headlines. 3 months later, the town held a memorial service. Claire remembered the hollow feeling in the school gymnasium. 15 empty chairs arranged in a semicircle, each with a printed name card. No photographs adorned the makeshift altar, just names on paper, as if the missing kids had been abstractions rather than flesh and blood. Parents weren't permitted to speak. The principal had delivered a sterile, emotionless address about accepting the unknown and moving forward as a community. Claire had watched Janie's parents sitting stone-faced in the front row, their grief calcified into something harder and more permanent. Now, 18 years later, this bracelet had surfaced in a thrift store 3 blocks from where Janie had last been seen. It wasn't just an object, it was evidence. Evidence that the official story, or rather, the lack of one, was wrong. Claire closed her fingers around the bracelet, feeling the metal warm against her palm. Someone knew what happened to those 14 kids. Someone knew what happened to Janie. And now, Claire was determined to uncover the truth that Delpine had, buried for nearly 2 decades. Claire's mind raced as she sat in her car, the silver charm bracelet cold against her palm. Her fingers traced over the initials J.D. Janie Delcourt, the evidence now tangible and undeniable. 18 years of silence, 18 years of tragic, accident narratives and pitying looks whenever she'd ask questions. But this bracelet changed everything. This proves they lied, she whispered to herself, her breath fogging the window. The bracelet shouldn't exist. Not here, not now, not in a thrift store in Delpine. If the official story were true, that Bus 12 had veered off Route 6 into the ravine during that freak October storm. Then this bracelet should be buried under mud and twisted metal, not sitting pristine in a display case at second chances. Claire closed her eyes, remembering the memorial service. 14 empty chairs, no bodies to bury, the school principal speaking in rehearsed platitudes about tragic loss while parents clutched at photographs. Her father, Dan Wren, had kept her home that day with a suspicious fever that vanished by afternoon. She'd missed the field trip by mere hours, while Janie had texted her excitedly that morning, "Wish you were here." The bracelet glinted under the streetlight. Claire examined each charm. The music note from Janie's first recital, the tiny dog that matched her beloved terrier, the letter J her grandmother had given her for her 12th birthday. These weren't mass-produced trinkets. They were specific to Janie's life. Someone in Delpine knew what happened. Someone had this bracelet all these years. The thought made her stomach tighten, with both dread and determination. She started her vehicle, the engine's rumble breaking the night's silence. Bear Hollow Preserve wasn't just a nature trail, it was the last known destination of Bus 12. The official search had lasted 3 days before being called off. No survivors possible, the sheriff had announced, but Claire remembered the whispers between adults when they thought no one was listening. The town's collective silence was a fortress built brick by brick over 18 years. Questions about the missing children were met with averted gazes and changed subjects. The Delpine Gazette had published exactly 1 article before the story. Disappeared completely. Claire slipped the bracelet onto her wrist, feeling its weight, physical and symbolic. Tomorrow, she would start asking questions again. She would trace the path of that bus, find whoever donated this bracelet, and uncover what really happened that October morning. The town's refusal to talk was no longer an obstacle. It was a challenge. A challenge Claire Wren was finally ready to accept, even if it meant reopening wounds that Delpine had spent nearly 2 decades trying to forget. The next morning, Claire Wren parked her car in the visitor's spot outside Delpine Middle School. The building stood like a monument to frozen time, its brick facade weathered but stubbornly intact, the sagging roof still missing the same shingles she remembered from her childhood. Several letters had fallen from the school sign, leaving Deline Midley S. Who to greet visitors. Claire sat motionless behind the wheel, gathering courage as memories crashed over her. "Ghosts everywhere," she whispered, clutching Janie's bracelet in her palm until the metal warmed against her skin. The hallways smelled exactly the same, floor wax and adolescent anxiety, with undertones of cafeteria food. Claire's footsteps echoed against the linoleum as she made her way to the main office, where a middle-aged receptionist with reading glasses perched on her nose barely looked up from her computer. "Can I help you?" the woman asked, her tone professionally detached. "I hope so," Claire replied, leaning slightly against the counter. "I'm Claire Wren. My father is Dan Wren. He used to work with the district." The receptionist's eyes flickered with recognition. "Dan's daughter? I thought you moved away years ago." 7 years, Claire confirmed. "I'm back temporarily." She hesitated before adding, "I was a student here, class of 2007. The woman's fingers stilled on her keyboard. "Oh, I wasn't on the bus that day," Claire continued, watching the receptionist's face carefully. "I had strep throat. My best friend Janie Delcourt was, though." The atmosphere in the small office shifted, temperature seemingly dropping several degrees. The receptionist, whose nameplate read Mrs. Winters, removed her glasses slowly. "We don't typically discuss that incident," she said, voice lowered. "There's a memorial plaque in the courtyard if you'd like to." Claire placed the silver charm bracelet on the counter. The tiny music note caught the fluorescent light, glinting accusingly. "I found this yesterday, in a thrift store across from the post office." Mrs. Winters' face drained of color. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached toward the bracelet, but stopped short of touching it. That's Janie's," she whispered. "I remember it. She played that little music charm with her fingers during morning announcements." Her eyes darted to the office door, then back to Claire. "Where did you say you found this?" "Second Chances, the new thrift store." Claire leaned closer. "How is this possible? After 18 years. Mrs. Winters glanced nervously at the security camera in the corner, then reached for a visitor's badge. "Come with me," she said quietly. "There are some things you should see, but we don't have much time." The school secretary's eyes darted nervously as she unlocked the records room door. 10 minutes, Miss Wren. That's all I can give you without authorization." Claire nodded gratefully, slipping into the musty space filled with metal shelving. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting shadows across decades of Delpine's educational history. Her fingers traced the spines of yearbooks until she found 2007, the year everything changed. The yearbook fell open with a crack of its binding, pages stiff from disuse. Claire's breath caught as she found Janie Delcourt's 7th-grade portrait. Her best friend smiled back at her, brown hair pulled into a side ponytail, braces gleaming, and eyes bright with possibility. Claire traced the outline of Janie's face, remembering how she'd laughed during sleepovers and how she'd tap her bracelet charms when she was nervous before tests. "You had no idea what was coming," Claire whispered, her voice barely audible in the silent room. She turned to the activities section, finding a group photo of the science club. Janie stood in the back row, making bunny ears behind another student's head. The caption mentioned their upcoming field trip to Bear Hollow Preserve, scheduled for October 12th. Moving to the file cabinets, Claire located the trip records. Her hands trembled as she pulled out a manila folder labeled Field Trips Fall 2007. Inside, she found permission slips, insurance forms, and the bus roster for that fateful day. The roster made her blood run cold. Every student name had been methodically blacked out with heavy marker, the ink so thick it had warped the paper. Only one name remained untouched at the bottom. Chaperone Driver, Mr. Alan Baird, substitute. Claire frowned, trying to recall the man. She'd been homesick that day with strep throat, the coincidence that had saved her life. She'd never met Baird, never seen him in the hallways before the trip. Frantically, she searched the staff directory, finding no entry for Alan Baird. She pulled out her phone, quickly searching social media and public records. Nothing. No teaching. License in Vermont, no address history, no digital footprint whatsoever. The substitute teacher who had driven 14 children to their disappearance was a ghost. No background check results, no emergency contact. Not even a photo in the staff section of the yearbook. Claire photographed everything. The redacted roster, the yearbook pages, the permission slips, her fingers working quickly as the minutes ticked away. The door handle rattled with a warning knock. "Miss Wren, your time's up." Claire closed the folders, sliding everything back into place, except for one photocopy of the roster she slipped into her bag. As she left, a chill ran down her spine. It wasn't just that 14 kids had vanished without a trace. Someone had systematically erased their journey, leaving only one name behind. A name that seemed to exist solely for that single, terrible day. Claire's throat tightened as she sat in her father's kitchen, staring at the yearbook pages. Someone had methodically, deliberately erased every trace of those 14 students and their chaperone. This wasn't simple neglect or bureaucratic oversight. It was strategy, a calculated blackout designed to make people forget. They wanted us to stop asking questions, she whispered to the empty room, her fingers tracing the redacted names. The next morning, Claire Wren marched into Delpine's public library, a building she'd practically lived in during high school. The elderly librarian recognized her immediately, offering a warm but cautious smile as Claire requested access to archived town newsletters and council meeting minutes from 2007. "Research project?" the woman asked, her eyes lingering on the notebook in Claire's hand. "Something like that," Claire replied, not wanting to reveal too much. For hours, she pored over dusty files and council PDFs on an ancient computer that wheezed with each new document. Her back ached from hunching over the screen, but the discomfort faded as tiny, crucial details began to surface. In a quarterly Parks Bulletin, she found a notice that Bear Hollow Preserve had been closed for environmental assessment from 2004 to early 2007, reopening just 2 months before the ill-fated field trip. "Why would they take students to a newly reopened preserve?" she muttered, jotting down dates and inconsistencies. Even more puzzling was the bus route. According to a transportation memo, Bus 12 was scheduled to take Route 6A to reach Bear Hollow, a road that appeared on no modern maps. Claire cross-referenced with County Highway Archives and discovered Route 6A had been decommissioned and renamed after a bridge collapse in 1998. "They couldn't have taken that route," she whispered. "It didn't exist anymore." She printed everything, hands trembling slightly as she fed quarters into the ancient machine. These weren't random oversights. Someone had fabricated an impossible journey, sending 14 children and a teacher on a route that couldn't be followed. As Claire gathered her materials, she noticed a thin folder labeled Field Trip Approvals 2007. Inside was a single sheet with the Bear Hollow trip authorization, signed not by the principal, but by Eleanor Rutherford, a school board member Claire had never heard of. The signature was elegant, authoritative, and at the bottom a handwritten note, "Special access granted, standard protocols waived." Claire photographed the document with her phone, her heart racing. This wasn't just about a missing bus anymore. The entire field trip had been orchestrated, exceptions made, routes falsified. Someone wanted those specific children on that specific bus heading to a freshly reopened facility and then made sure no one would ever find them. Claire Wren's hands trembled slightly as she unfolded the weathered flyer she'd unearthed from the library archives. The faded ink showed a cheerful illustration of Bear Hollow Preserve, promising educational adventures for young minds. She placed it beside a topographical map on her passenger seat, both items illuminated by the fading afternoon light. The rental car lurched over uneven terrain as she followed the narrow dirt road toward what remained of Deer Path Trail. 18 years of neglect had transformed the once-maintained path into a tangle of undergrowth and fallen branches. Claire parked where the road ended, grabbing her flashlight despite the daylight. Something told her she might need it. "This is where they would have gone," she whispered to herself, stepping carefully over a rotted wooden marker. The silence felt oppressive, broken only by distant birdsong and the crunch of leaves beneath her boots. Following what remained of the trail, Claire checked her map every few minutes. The path curved exactly as shown on the faded document, winding through increasingly dense forest. The afternoon sun struggled to penetrate the canopy, casting everything in a greenish gloom that made her flashlight necessary sooner than expected. "Bus 12 would have stopped right about," she muttered, counting her steps and comparing landmarks to the map. The trail opened to a small clearing that seemed unnaturally flat compared to the surrounding terrain. Claire swept away years of accumulated pine needles with her foot, revealing the edge of something manufactured. Kneeling, she brushed away more debris until her fingers met cold concrete, a slab partially sunken into the earth. Weather and time had cracked its surface, but the structure remained solid. Near one edge, barely visible through moss and lichen, she found markings. Claire scraped away the growth with her car key, revealing letters and numbers etched into the concrete. BHP 27. Bear Hollow Project? She wondered aloud, pulling out her phone to photograph the discovery. The flash illuminated the clearing, briefly, and she took several angles of the concrete and the code. A twig snapped somewhere behind her. Claire froze, suddenly aware of how isolated she was. Slowly, she turned, sweeping her flashlight across the darkening woods. A man stood at the edge of the clearing, his face half hidden in shadow. He held a shovel in one hand, its metal head reflecting her flashlight beam. His posture was rigid, watchful, neither approaching nor retreating. "This is private property," he called, voice rough with age or disuse. Claire's throat went dry. She clutched her phone tighter, the evidence safely captured. "I'm researching the Delpine school bus disappearance," she replied, struggling to keep her voice steady. "From 2007. The man took a step, forward, and Claire saw his weathered face clearly for the first time. His eyes narrowed, assessing her with unexpected recognition. "You're Dan Wren's daughter," he said. It wasn't a question. "Tom Granger," the man said, extending a weathered hand. His eyes darted nervously to the concrete slab Claire had been photographing. "I was part of the volunteer search team back in '07. Claire tucked Janie's bracelet into her pocket, studying his face. "You helped look for the bus?" Tom nodded, leaning against his shovel. "For 3 days. That's all they gave us." His voice dropped to a near whisper. "Then the feds showed up. Men in dark suits with clipboards and satellite phones. They shut everything down just like that. But 14 children were missing," Claire pressed. "Tell me about it." Tom wiped his brow with a handkerchief. "We begged to keep searching. Some parents even tried to organize their own teams, but the authorities threatened arrests, said it was for our safety." The wind rustled through the trees as Tom glanced over his shoulder. The strangest thing was the tire tracks. "We found them on day 3, fresh tracks that weren't there the day before. By morning they were gone, completely erased." Claire felt her pulse quicken. Someone moved the bus. Or what was left of it. The volunteer kicked at the dirt. Look, there's something about Bear Hollow nobody talks about. This wasn't just some nature preserve. Back in the 60s and 70s, the government ran experiments here. What kind of experiments? Claire asked, her recorder capturing every word. Psychological mostly, some chemical. They'd bring in subjects, volunteers, they called them. Tom pointed to the concrete slab. BHP-27 was one of their facilities. Storage, containment, something like that. The kind of place they didn't want. Civilians stumbling across. Claire remembered the council records mentioning the Department of Environmental Testing. So the field trip never should have happened, Tom finished. Bear Hollow had been closed for 3 years before those kids disappeared. Someone deliberately reopened it just for that day, just for that bus. He handed Claire a faded business card. I kept notes, things they told us to forget. The substitute teacher, Alan Baird. Nobody ever saw him before that day, and nobody's seen him since. Claire's thoughts raced to the school's personnel file stamped, "Do not pursue." The search teams were looking in the wrong places, Tom continued. We were told to comb the ravines, check for crash sites. But that bus didn't crash. Someone took it, and those kids, somewhere else entirely. As darkness began to fall, Tom glanced nervously at his watch. I've said too much already. People around here don't like questions about Bear Hollow or Bus 12. Be careful who you trust, Ms. Wren. He shouldered his shovel and turned to leave, then paused. If you're really determined to find what happened to your friend Janie and the others, look into who authorized that field trip in the first place. Nothing in this town happens by accident. Tom's words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. The bus never sent a distress call. Not one. And Baird vanished the same day. No resignation, no forwarding address. It's like he appeared just for that morning and then, poof! Claire Wren gripped her notebook tighter, her knuckles whitening. The substitute teacher had materialized from nowhere. No previous teaching positions, no local connections, nothing that would explain his sudden appearance at Delpine Middle School that fateful October morning. Did anyone interview his references? She asked. Tom shook his head. There weren't any to interview. His application had recommendation letters, but when they tried to contact those people after the disappearance, he made a slicing motion across his throat. Dead ends, fake names, disconnected numbers. The implications were staggering. Alan Baird wasn't just mysterious. He was manufactured. A phantom inserted into the school system for a specific purpose. The thought made Claire's skin crawl. She thanked Tom and left the diner, her mind racing with possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. As she turned onto Maple Street, a silver pickup truck with tinted windows rolled past, slowing momentarily beside her. Claire quickened her pace, clutching her bag closer. 3 blocks later, the same vehicle appeared again, cruising alongside her before turning at the intersection. No coincidence. Someone was watching her. The weight of unseen eyes pressed against her back as she ducked into Harmon's pharmacy, pretending to browse while peering through the window. The truck circled the block once more before disappearing down a side street. Claire's heart hammered against her ribs. Her investigation had barely begun, yet she'd already stirred something or someone from 18 years of carefully maintained silence. She slipped out the back door and cut through the alley behind Main Street, emerging beside the town library. The building's stone facade offered a promise of sanctuary and information. Inside, the familiar smell of old books and furniture polish calmed her racing pulse. I need access to the town archives, she told the librarian, a woman who didn't recognize her but nodded at the mention of Dan Wren's name. In the basement archive room, surrounded by dusty boxes and flickering fluorescent lights, Claire felt both hidden and exposed. She pulled file after file, searching for any mention of Alan Baird. The man was a ghost, appearing from nowhere, taking 14 children and vanishing without a trace. As she photographed a personnel document with her phone, a shadow passed across the narrow basement window. Claire froze, suddenly aware that her quest for answers had transformed her from observer to target. Someone in Delpine didn't want these questions asked, and they were watching her every move. Claire hunched over the dusty archives in the Delpine Library, her fingers tracing the council minutes from October 2007. What she found, or rather what she didn't find, sent a chill down her spine. 3 crucial weeks of documentation surrounding the disappearance were simply gone, cleanly removed, as if they never existed. Someone didn't want this information public, she whispered to herself, scanning the remaining pages more carefully. On page 47, a single cryptic entry caught her eye. Motion approved. Renewal of lease agreement with Department of Environmental Testing for Facility BHP-27, contingent upon continued restricted access protocols for all third-party researchers and civilian personnel. The date was September 28th, 2 weeks before the bus vanished. Claire pulled out her notebook, connecting dots that had remained separate for 18 years. Bear Hollow Preserve had been officially closed to the public for 3 full years before suddenly reopening in early October 2007, just days before the field trip. Why reopen a nature preserve that housed a secret testing facility? And why send children there immediately after? She dug deeper, finding budget allocations for environmental remediation at Bear Hollow that abruptly ceased in August 2007. The paperwork trail showed permits for educational excursions had been fast-tracked through approval channels, bypassing standard safety reviews. They wanted those kids there, Claire murmured, her heart racing. This wasn't just a routine field trip. The librarian glanced over nervously as Claire spread documents across the table. Town maps from before and after showed subtle differences. Access, roads that disappeared, trail markers that changed, and most tellingly, the entire northeastern quadrant of Bear Hollow redrawn with different contour lines. Claire photographed everything with her phone, hands trembling. The official narrative, a tragic accident, a bus lost in remote terrain, was unraveling thread by thread. Someone had deliberately altered records, removed evidence, and obscured the timeline surrounding the disappearance. In the margins of a council subcommittee report, a handwritten note read, BHP access clearance, 14 student passes, plus 2 adult supervision required. The number matched exactly, 14 children and 2 adults, the science teacher and the driver. Claire sat back, the weight of her discovery pressing against her chest. This wasn't negligence or bureaucratic oversight. The town's officials, perhaps reaching to state or even federal levels, had orchestrated an elaborate cover-up. They had wiped evidence, obscured timelines, and buried the truth about what happened to Bus 12 and its passengers. Whatever happened at Bear Hollow was planned, and someone powerful wanted it to stay hidden forever. Claire Wren spread her findings across her father's kitchen table, creating a chaotic mosaic of evidence. Photographs of the concrete slab at Deer Path Trail, photocopied council minutes with suspicious gaps, and most haunting of all, Janie's silver charm bracelet glinting under the overhead light. The music note charm caught the light as Claire shifted papers, a reminder of her best friend's passion for piano. This can't all be coincidence, she muttered, organizing the documents chronologically. Her father's house felt eerily quiet, the familiar lemon polish scent now seeming to mask darker secrets. The sudden ping of her phone made her jump. An unknown number displayed a message that sent ice through her veins. You're asking dangerous questions. Let it go. Claire stared at the screen, her hand trembling slightly. Someone was watching her movements around Delpine. The silver pickup truck she'd noticed earlier suddenly made more sense. She glanced nervously at the windows, drawing the curtains closed before returning to her work. Dad kept everything, she whispered, heading to Dan Wren's study. The organized filing cabinets reflected her father's methodical nature, even as their relationship had grown distant over the years. Claire pulled open the drawer labeled School District and rifled through meticulously labeled folders until she found one, marked Personnel 2007. Inside were employment records for teachers and staff from that fateful year. She flipped through them anxiously until she found what she was looking for, Alan Baird's file. Unlike the other thick folders containing performance reviews and background checks, Baird's was suspiciously thin. Hired September 3rd, 2007, Claire read aloud. Terminated October 13th, just one day after the disappearance. The final page bore a red stamp that made her blood run cold. Do not pursue. Claire sat back in her father's leather chair, the implications washing over her. Alan Baird wasn't just a substitute teacher who happened to be driving that day. He was planted there, specifically for Bus 12, specifically for those 14 children. She photographed the file with shaking hands, then carefully returned everything to its place. Back at the kitchen table, she added Baird's employment dates to her timeline. The picture forming was no longer one of a tragic accident or even an opportunistic crime. This was calculated, orchestrated from within the school system itself. This was never an accident, Claire whispered to the empty house. She clutched Janie's bracelet, running her thumb over the letter J charm. Someone took you all on purpose. Her phone pinged again, the same unknown number. Final warning. Claire sat in her car outside the Vermont Department of Transportation, clutching her phone nervously. The call had taken 3 attempts and a carefully constructed story about a research project on transportation safety, but finally she'd convinced someone to help. The transportation officer had reluctantly agreed to search for archived GPS data from Bus 12. Ms. Wren, the voice on the other end sounded hesitant. I found something odd about that school bus from 2007. Claire's heart raced as she scribbled frantically in her notebook. The data showed Bus 12's signal had vanished, completely at 8:14 in the morning, just past Deer Path Trail. A full 20 minutes before it should have reached Bear Hollow Preserve. The officer seemed puzzled by this abrupt disappearance, mentioning that GPS systems rarely failed so completely, even back then. There's something else, he added, lowering his voice. The signal reappeared briefly, hours later. Claire nearly dropped her pen. Where? When exactly? The second ping had registered at 3:27 that afternoon, approximately 15 miles north of the original location, near an abandoned rail yard that had once served the lumber industry. The signal lasted only 38 seconds before disappearing permanently. After hanging up, she immediately drove to the public library, where she requested satellite imagery of the area from October 2007. The librarian gave her a curious look, but helped locate the archived files. Claire spent hours comparing images, looking for any sign of the distinctive yellow vehicle. This doesn't make sense, she whispered to herself, spreading the printouts across the table. If Bus 12 had crashed, there would be evidence. Debris, environmental damage, emergency response activity. But the satellite images showed nothing unusual at the original disappearance site. The rail yard images, however, revealed something chilling. A faint rectangular shape appeared in one frame, approximately the size of a school bus, partially covered by what looked like a tarp or camouflage netting. In the next available image, taken 3 days later, it was gone. Claire leaned back, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. The bus hadn't simply vanished in an accident. Someone had moved it, hidden it deliberately, and not just anyone could orchestrate something like that. It would require resources, authority, and the power to manipulate records and silence witnesses. She carefully arranged the printouts in her folder, her hands trembling slightly. The 14 children and their teacher hadn't just disappeared by chance. They had been taken, and their disappearance meticulously engineered. As she left the library, Claire felt eyes on her back. She quickened her pace, clutching the folder tightly against her chest. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to hide what happened to Bus 12, and now they might be watching her too. Claire's knuckles whitened around her steering wheel. As she pulled into the cracked asphalt lot of Pinetop gas station, the faded blue awning and rust-spotted pumps looked frozen in time, exactly as they had 18 years ago when Bus 12 had passed this way. This forgotten outpost sat just half a mile from where the GPS signal had mysteriously cut out. A bell jingled as she pushed open the door. Behind the counter, an elderly man with liver-spotted hands and thick glasses glanced up from his crossword puzzle. "Help you?" he asked, voice gravelly from decades of cigarettes. "I'm looking into something that happened in 2007, Claire said, approaching slowly. "A school bus that passed through here. October 12th. The man's—" Face hardened. "Don't know nothing about any bus. It would have stopped here," Claire pressed, placing a satellite image on the counter. "Bus 12 from Delpine Middle School." "We get lots of vehicles through here," he muttered, eyes darting to the back room. "Can't remember everyone." Claire leaned closer. "I'm Dan Wren's daughter. My best friend was on that bus." Something shifted in the old man's expression. Recognition, then resignation. Without a word, he shuffled to the back room, returning moments later with a dusty cardboard box. "Security system was new back then," he explained, digging through tangled cables and plastic cases. "Owner kept backups of everything for years. Paranoid type." He produced a VHS tape labeled in faded marker, "Cam Backup 2007, OCT 12. Claire's heart hammered as the attendant led her to a small television behind the counter. The ancient VCR accepted the tape with a mechanical groan. Static cleared to reveal grainy black-and-white footage of the gas station forecourt. The timestamp read 7:42 a.m. "There," the old man pointed. "Bus 12 rolled into frame, yellow paint dull in the morning light. It stopped near the edge of the property, engine running." Claire leaned closer, squinting at the driver's window. "That's not the regular driver," she whispered. The camera captured Alan Baird's profile clearly. Thin face, dark hair, expressionless. He wore a plain black jacket rather than the blue windbreaker all school personnel were required to wear. "Never got out," the attendant commented. "Just sat there for 3 minutes, then drove off." Claire watched, transfixed, as the bus signaled and turned, not continuing east toward Bear. Hollow Preserve as planned, but north onto a narrow, unmarked road. "That's Gravel Spur," the old man said. "Nobody uses it. Goes nowhere except deeper into the woods." "Can I have this tape?" Claire asked, already reaching for her wallet. The attendant unplugged the VCR. "Take it. Been keeping it too long. Anyway." He handed her the tape, his weathered face solemn. "Whatever happened to those kids, it wasn't right. Never was." Claire's hands trembled as she clutched the VHS tape. The grainy label, "Cam Backup 2007, might hold the answers she'd been searching for all these years. With nowhere else to turn, she drove to Margaret Harker's modest bungalow on the outskirts of Delpine. Margaret Harker greeted her with a warm but cautious smile. The retired teacher had been one of her father's closest colleagues and one of the few who had openly questioned the official narrative about the missing bus. "Dan always said you'd come back someday," Margaret said, ushering Claire into a living room filled with books and faded photographs. "He knew you wouldn't let it rest." Claire placed the tape on the coffee table. "I need to see what's on this. The gas station attendant at Pine Top said it shows bus 12 that morning." Margaret's eyes widened. She disappeared into her basement, returning with an ancient VCR covered in dust. "Haven't used this in years," she muttered, connecting cables to her television set. The screen flickered to life, static, giving way to a timestamp. October 12th, 2007, 7:42 a.m. The gas station's exterior camera captured bus 12 pulling into the lot, stopping briefly, then continuing onward. Claire leaned forward, her breath catching as she recognized the driver. "That's Alan Baird," she whispered. "He's driving the bus." Margaret nodded grimly. "He shouldn't have been. Baird was never certified to drive a school bus. He was a substitute science teacher who'd been with us less than 3 weeks. The footage showed Baird stepping out briefly, wearing a plain black jacket rather than the standard-issue blue windbreaker all district drivers wore. He glanced around furtively before returning to the vehicle. "Watch!" Margaret pointed as the bus pulled away. He's turning onto Gravel Spur. That road doesn't lead to Bear Hollow Preserve. It goes deeper into the restricted area. Claire felt a chill run down her spine. Was this planned all along? The regular driver called in sick that morning, Margaret explained, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. The transportation office received an anonymous call reassigning the route to Baird. No questions asked, no verification. He barely spoke to any of us during his time at the school. The evidence was damning. Alan Baird wasn't just in the wrong place. He was deliberately placed there. The substitute teacher had been planted, the entire field trip engineered as a setup. "Did my father know?" Claire asked, her voice barely audible. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Dan suspected something wasn't right. That's why he kept those personnel files. He was looking for connections, just like you are now. Claire rewound the tape, watching again as the bus turned away from its designated route, carrying 14 unsuspecting children into oblivion. "This wasn't an accident," she whispered. "Someone wanted those kids on that bus with that driver on that day." Claire Wren spread the weathered maps across her father's kitchen table, her fingers tracing the faded lines of roads that no longer existed on modern GPS. The forbidden Gravel Spur appeared only on maps from before 2000, branching off from Deer Path Trail like a secret vein into the heart of the woods. "This is it," she whispered, marking the terminus with a red pen. The road led to nowhere official, yet according to Tom's information, it connected directly to the mysterious BHP-27 facility. Claire packed methodically, her flashlight with fresh batteries, a small notebook filled with her investigation notes, a bottle of water, and Janie's silver charm bracelet, which she slipped into her jacket pocket. The weight of it against her chest felt like a talisman, a connection to her lost friend that transcended the 18 years of silence. The autumn afternoon was fading as she parked her vehicle at the overgrown entrance to Gravel Spur. No signs marked this path. Nature had reclaimed what humans had abandoned. Claire followed the barely visible track, her boots crunching on gravel occasionally visible beneath layers of fallen leaves. The deeper she ventured, the more the forest seemed to close in around her. Tall pines blocked out the remaining sunlight, creating a premature twilight. The air grew still, heavy with the scent of decomposing vegetation and something else, metallic and artificial, like old machinery. "I'm coming, Janie," she murmured, clutching the flashlight tighter as the path narrowed further. After 40 minutes of hiking, Claire reached a clearing that didn't look natural. The trees formed an almost perfect circle around a depression in the earth. Most hikers might have walked past, assuming it was just an unusual formation, but Claire knew better. She approached carefully, brushing away years of fallen leaves and forest debris. Beneath the natural camouflage, concrete emerged, grey and implacable. Claire's heart pounded as she cleared more area, revealing what looked like a bunker entrance partially reclaimed by moss and vines. The structure was unmistakably man-made. Concrete walls jutted from the earth at precise angles, weathered but intact. A set of stairs descended into darkness, the entrance partially blocked by a rusted metal door hanging from a single hinge. Claire stood at the threshold, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness below. Cold air rose from the opening, carrying the musty scent of abandonment and secrets. This was BHP-27, not a nature preserve building, but something deliberately hidden, buried in the Vermont woods, where 14 children and their teacher had vanished. She took a deep breath, touched Janie's bracelet for courage, and began her descent into the waiting darkness. Claire Wren's flashlight beam cut through the darkness as she descended into BHP-27. The air grew thick with the stench of mildew and chemical preservatives, a nauseating cocktail that burned her nostrils with each breath. Her footsteps echoed against concrete walls, creating ghostly companions in the silence. The narrow corridors branched like veins beneath the earth. Faded signs hung at crooked angles. Interview Room A, with its peeling letters, medical observation, behind a reinforced door and storage scrawled in hurried red paint. Claire documented everything with trembling hands, her phone's camera flash illuminating decades of abandonment. An unmarked room at the end of the hallway drew her forward. The heavy metal door groaned as she pushed it open, revealing a space no larger than a classroom. In the center stood a child-sized chair, its metal legs bolted firmly to the concrete floor. A broken leather strap dangled from one armrest, evidence of restraint that made Claire's stomach lurch. "What happened here?" she whispered to the emptiness. Her flashlight beam caught the dusty surface of a chalkboard mounted on the far wall. 3 words were written in faded yellow chalk. She said, "Wait." The handwriting was small, precise, clinical. Claire traced the letters with her fingertip, wondering whose voice had been recorded in this underground prison. As she turned to leave, something glinted on the floor near the chair. Claire knelt down, brushing away years of dust to reveal a small silver charm, a music note identical to the one on Janie's bracelet. Her hands shook as she picked it up. This wasn't from the bracelet she carried. The clasp was different, the silver less tarnished. There were more, she realized aloud. They made duplicates. The beam of her flashlight swept across the walls, revealing what she'd initially missed. Names, dozens of them, scratched into the concrete with fingernails, paper clips, anything that could leave a mark. Some were deep and clear. "Mark was here. Emma 2007. Help us." Others had faded with time, becoming ghostly whispers in the concrete. Among them, Claire found what she was looking for. JD, carved beside a crude musical note. Janie had been here, leaving her marked like a prisoner counting days. Claire pressed her palm against her best friend's initials, feeling the rough edges against her skin. "They weren't lost," she whispered. "They were kept." A distant metallic sound, chains, dragging across concrete, echoed from somewhere deeper in the facility. Claire froze, her breath caught in her throat as the sound grew closer. She wasn't alone in the darkness. Claire Wren burst through the exit door of the facility, gasping for fresh air as her lungs burned. The sound of metal chains scraping against concrete followed her out, though she couldn't tell if it was real or just echoing in her mind. She sprinted through the woods until the trees thinned and sunlight spilled through the canopy. Only then did she collapse onto the forest floor, her hands trembling as she clutched Janie's bracelet. Back in her father's kitchen, she spread her findings across the table. The photographs of the underground chambers revealed a clinical coldness. Not a crash site, but a detention center. The restraint chair bolted to the floor with its broken leather strap told a story of captivity. The duplicate music note charm, identical to the one on Janie's bracelet but newer, suggested someone had been making copies. And those names scratched into the wall, 14 of them, matched every missing child. "They weren't lost," Claire whispered to the empty room. "They were kept." Her father's personnel files yielded another lead. Ray Alvarez, a substitute bus driver who'd been mysteriously reassigned after the incident. His file contained a yellow sticky note with handwritten text. "Reassigned. Paid out. No further. Use after B12 incident." The B12 designation sent chills down her spine. Bus 12. Claire tracked Ray to a small apartment above the hardware store. The former driver opened his door just enough to reveal a weathered face and suspicious eyes. "I've been waiting 18 years for someone to ask the right questions," he said, inviting her inside. Ray's apartment was sparse but meticulously organized. He pulled out a folder from behind a loose baseboard. "I was supposed to drive that day," he explained, his voice barely above a whisper. "Got a call at 5 in the morning. Anonymous. Said I wasn't needed, that they'd found a replacement." "Alan Baird," Claire said. Ray nodded. "Never seen him before. Never even heard his name until that morning. When I checked in later, they said he had all the proper credentials, but—" He paused, shaking his head. "No bus driver just appears out of nowhere." He showed Claire a crumpled assignment sheet. The original driver's name was crossed out, replaced with A. Baird in different handwriting. No morning check-in required. Claire read aloud, pointing to a notation in the margin. That's against every protocol we had, Ray confirmed. Nobody skips check-in. Nobody. Unless someone wanted Baird to avoid questions. As Claire photographed the document, Ray's hands shook. They paid me to forget what I saw, but how do you forget 14 missing kids? Ray Alvarez's hands trembled slightly as he slid the yellowed paper across the diner table. Claire Wren stared at the document, her coffee forgotten. It was the original driver assignment roster from October 2007, a piece of evidence that should have been destroyed years ago. I kept it, Ray whispered, glancing nervously at the other patrons. Something felt wrong that day. When they told me I was being reassigned last minute, I photocopied the schedule before turning it in. Claire's finger traced the damning evidence. Bus 12, originally assigned to Ray, had been manually crossed out and reassigned to A. Baird in different handwriting. Most telling was the notation beside it. No morning check-in required. Every driver had to check in, Ray explained. Safety protocols. But Baird, they gave him a free pass. No supervision, no questions. Claire studied the substitute driver's face. His weathered features carried the weight of 18 years of silence. Did you ever meet him? Baird? She asked. Ray shook his head. Never. Saw him before or after. It was like he materialized just for that day, then vanished. When I asked questions afterward, they offered me a reassignment bonus to transfer to the high school route. Claire carefully photographed the document with her phone. The puzzle pieces were aligning with terrifying clarity. This wasn't just about covering up an accident or even a kidnapping. The entire operation had been meticulously planned. The school board knew, Claire whispered, her voice barely audible. They had to have authorized this. Ray nodded grimly. Look at the signature authorizing the change. At the bottom of the page was an elegant script. Eleanor Rutherford, board treasurer, with the stamp of Mornington Educational Trust beside it. Claire's heart hammered against her ribs. This wasn't just a local cover-up. It reached beyond Delpine. The Mornington Educational Trust had overseen 5 school districts in Vermont, including the one where her father had worked. They buried everything, Claire said, connecting the dots. The school records, the council minutes, the search reports. They systematically erased 14 children from history. Ray leaned forward. Ask yourself why a prestigious educational foundation would go to such lengths. What was on that bus that was worth 14 kids? As Claire left the diner, tucking the precious document into her bag, a cold certainty settled in her stomach. The disappearance wasn't random or accidental. Baird hadn't been hired to teach. He'd been inserted into Delpine Middle School for one purpose only, to drive those specific children to a destination that was never Bear Hollow. Claire's research had finally led her to the name that appeared. On every redacted document and closure order, Eleanor Rutherford. The school board member's signature was a constant presence throughout the paper trail, elegant and authoritative, marking each step of the cover-up. After cross-referencing old town directories, Claire found the Rutherford estate on the outskirts of Delpine. The mansion stood partially hidden behind overgrown hedges, its Victorian architecture crumbling under years of neglect. The peeling paint and boarded windows couldn't mask what it once had been. A symbol of power and influence. Claire waited until dusk before approaching. The lock on the side entrance gave way, with surprising ease, as if inviting her inside. Dust particles danced in the beam of her flashlight as she moved through rooms filled with antique furniture draped in yellowed sheets. In what appeared to be a home office, filing cabinets lined the walls. The third drawer she tried contained what she'd been searching for. Medical files organized by initials, detailed sketches of Bus 12's interior layout, and seating charts with cryptic notations beside each child's name. Susceptibility ratings, Claire whispered, tracing her finger over Janie's name, which had been marked with the highest score. Behind a bookshelf, she discovered a small recording studio. Equipment from another era sat untouched, including a reel-to-reel tape machine. Beside it lay several labeled tapes, one marked Session 47 BHP-JD. With trembling hands, she threaded the tape and pressed play. Static crackled before a young voice emerged. Janie's voice, unmistakable even after 18 years. Day 47, began a clinical male voice. Subject JD, continue your description. The bus never moved. Janie's voice trembled. We keep thinking we're going somewhere, but we never leave. It's the same trees outside, the same rocks. Mr. Baird keeps driving, but we're in a loop. We never left. Claire's heart pounded. As she listened to her best friend describe what sounded like a controlled environment designed to appear as a never-ending journey. Tell me about the others, the male voice prompted. Some of them don't notice anymore, Janie whispered. They think we're still on a field trip, but I know what you're doing to us. Adi. The recording continued with Janie describing psychological tests disguised as educational activities, sleep deprivation experiments, and altered perceptions of time. Claire sat frozen as the truth crystallized. The disappearance wasn't an accident or abduction. It was a carefully orchestrated psychological experiment using children as unwitting subjects. Project Perception read a folder beside the tape machine, testing extended reality acceptance in developing minds. As Claire gathered evidence to photograph, the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The children hadn't vanished. They had been kept, observed, and studied, while an entire town was manipulated into silence. Claire Wren descended the narrow stone staircase beneath Gravel Spur, her flashlight beam cutting through decades of darkness. The air grew colder with each step, heavy with the scent of rust and forgotten secrets. When her light finally swept across the massive shape ahead, she froze. There it sat, Bus 12, untouched for 18 years, a time capsule of horror preserved. In the underground chamber, its yellow paint had dulled to a sickly ochre, but the Delpine School District logo remained clearly visible on its side. Claire approached slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. The door creaked open at her touch, revealing an interior frozen in time. Dust-covered backpacks still hung from hooks. Books lay open on seats, and on each seat rested a carefully placed name tag, 14 children and 1 teacher, arranged as if waiting for roll call that would never come. Janie, Claire whispered, finding her friend's seat near the back, the name written in neat block letters. She ran her fingers over the plastic, tears blurring her vision. A folded paper caught her eye, tucked beneath the driver's seat. With trembling hands, she unfolded the note, revealing childish handwriting. We weren't taken. We were kept. Underneath forever, until someone saw us. Claire photographed everything methodically. The bus interior, the name tags, the note, the strange equipment installed beneath the dashboard. This wasn't just evidence of abduction, it was proof of something far more sinister. The bus had never crashed. The children had never left. She composed a message to Elias Boone, the investigative reporter she'd contacted earlier that week. Attaching the photos and her complete findings, she hesitated only briefly before pressing send. The truth needed witnesses beyond herself. As Claire climbed back toward daylight, relief and dread mingled in her chest. She'd done it, uncovered what the town, the school board, and Eleanor Rutherford had worked so hard to bury. At the top of the stairs, a figure blocked her path. The man wore no distinguishing features she could later recall, just darkness where a face should be. He stepped forward, his voice eerily calm. "Thank you, Claire. That's all we needed." Before she could react, everything went black. 6 weeks later, Elias Boone received a package at his newspaper office. Inside lay Claire's complete investigation. Photos, notes, recordings, and the silver charm bracelet that had started everything. A handwritten note simply read, "Tell their story." The reporter spent days verifying Claire's findings before publishing his exposé. But when he tried to contact Claire or Dan Wren for comment, he discovered their house empty, their phones disconnected. They had vanished, just like the bus 18 years before. The truth finally had an audience. The names of the 14 children were spoken aloud once more. But the price of that truth was Claire herself, another name added to the list of those who disappeared in Delpine, Vermont, leaving behind only questions and the echo of secrets not meant to be found.